Paramount Decisions simplify the decision-making process and help organizations make more transparent and collaborative group decisions. In this series of tutorials, we will guide you step by step through the decision-making process. The decision-making process contains 8 steps, as specified in the upper menu. You can navigate through the different steps by clicking on this tab. Notice that you need to complete the step before moving to the next one, but you can always go back and edit previous steps. Each step contains a guide with instructions on what to do. You can either click on Learn More or watch video if you need any help. The left menu contains the main navigations. You can hover over it to view what it is, or click on it to go there. Each step includes an action box in the right menu. Using this, you can change the decision status, invite collaborators to the decision, upload documents related to the decision, or assign tasks. From the Activity box, you can view recent activities. The application tracks all changes to your decision. Start your decision by defining the decision name. Assign the decision to a project, and define a set of tags to help you group similar decisions. You can also define a due date and specify a reminder to help you remember to complete the decision. In the first step, you can also add additional info related to the decisions, such as the decision's objective, stakeholders involved in the decision, or any additional notes useful for the decision. You can fill this info when you first create the decision and edit the contents later. Please proceed to step number 2 to define your alternatives after completing this step. The second step of the decision-making process is to define the alternatives you are choosing between. An alternative could be 2 or more people, things, or plans from which one is to be chosen. In this example, we are choosing between different car alternatives. So the alternatives in this case are BMW X5, Mercedes C-Class, Toyota Camry, etc. You can add an alternative by placing your cursor in the alternative box and start typing. You can also add a description to an alternative here. This could be a detailed description to the alternative or additional references. To make an alternative more visible, you can also upload a picture of the alternative. You can do it by dragging and dropping an image into this box, or by uploading it manually from your computer. You can add a new alternative by simply clicking on Add Alternative. To delete an alternative, click on the trash bin next to the alternative you want to delete. Please proceed to step number 3 to define factors and criteria after completing this step. The third step in the decision-making process is to define factors and criteria for your alternatives. A factor is an element, part, or component of a decision. For example, when choosing between several car alternatives, some factors may include fuel economy, cargo space, brand, etc. You can start creating your first factor by placing your cursor in the factor box and start typing. You can add a want criterion and a must criterion for each factor. A criterion is a decision rule or a standard on which a decision can be based on. A want criterion represents preferences of one or multiple decision makers that is desired but not mandatory. A must criterion represents mandatory conditions that eliminate an alternative from consideration if that alternative does not meet them. Notice that cost is not considered as a factor, and due to its importance in the decision-making process, it needs to be defined and evaluated separately in step number 7. Remember that adding a want or must criterion is optional, and it is not mandatory to have both or either want and must criterion for each factor. You can add a new factor by clicking on Add Factor. To delete a factor, click on Trash Bin next to the factor you want to delete. Use the action box to the right for additional tools and actions, such as inviting your colleagues to collaborate, assign tasks, or upload additional documents. To invite others to collaborate, click on Add a Collaborator and start typing the name of the person you want to invite. If you don't find the person on the list, simply click on Invite User to join. Write the user's email Select what you want to collaborate on and what kind of access you want to give. Please proceed to step number 4 in order to summarize the attributes after completing this step. The fourth step in the decision-making process is to summarize the attributes of each alternative. An attribute is a characteristic, quality, or consequence of just one alternative. An attribute can either be objective, such as 40 miles per gallon for the fuel economy factor, or subjective, such as very well-known and respected brand for the brand factor. First, start by entering the attributes for all the alternatives. You can do it by placing your cursor on the Enter Attribute field next to each alternative. Press Enter or click outside the text box to save. Secondly, check if the attributes of each alternative meets the must criterion, if you have defined such in previous steps. In this example, we see that the must criterion for the fuel economy factor was defined in the previous step to must have greater than 20 miles per gallon. We see here that all alternatives meet the must criterion except for BMW X5. Therefore, we move the slider to No in this particular alternative. If an attribute to an alternative does not satisfy the must criterion, it will not be considered in the subsequent steps of the decision-making process, and the alternative will be removed. After filling out the attributes for the alternatives in the first factor, continue on to the next factor by clicking on the Define Attributes for the following factor, or by clicking on each factor tab in the top menu. Remember to complete all the steps. Click on the Summary tab to preview a summary of all attributes. You can add an attachment or any relevant documents to your decision by clicking on Add Documents in the action box in the right menu. To upload a document, simply drag and drop the document to the marked field or click on Manual Upload. You can also see all the documents that are connected to this particular decision in the same view. Please proceed to step number 5 in order to decide the advantages after completing this step. The fifth step in the decision-making process is to decide the advantages of each alternative. An advantage is a benefit, gain, improvement, or betterment. Specifically, an advantage is a difference between the attributes of two alternatives, such as 2 inches taller, much better flavor, etc. Make sure that you understand the difference between attribute and advantage. An attribute is something we need to know about just one alternative. Therefore, we use non-difference words in the names of attributes, such as long, excellent, etc. An advantage is a difference between the attributes of just two alternatives. Therefore, we use different words in the names of advantages, such as longer, better, etc. Also, remember that a decision must be based on only advantages, and not advantages and disadvantages. That is because a disadvantage of one alternative is an advantage of the other alternative. The names of advantage and disadvantage are two names for the same thing, and including both will lead to double counting. First, select the least preferred attribute in the first factor. You can look at the want criterion up here if you have defined such, to help you determine the least preferred attribute. In this example, for the fuel economy factor, we see the want criterion is the more fuel efficient, the better for the environment. Looking at the different attributes, we see that the alternative with Mercedes C-Class is the least fuel efficient, and hence have the least preferred attribute. Click on that to move to the next part. If there are two attributes that are the same and also happen to be the least preferred, you will get a message asking you whether you want to mark both as least preferred. If that is the case, click Confirm in order to move to the next part. Secondly, decide the advantages of each of the alternatives. Remember, an advantage is a difference between the attributes of just two alternatives. Therefore, in order to decide the advantage of each alternative, you need to determine the difference between the alternative's attribute and the least preferred attribute selected in the previous part. Notice that the alternative with the least preferred attribute has no advantages compared to the other attributes, and therefore is not listed in this part. Continuing on the same example, we have already selected 22 miles per gallon to be the least preferred attribute. Therefore, the advantage of the Toyota Camry hybrid alternative is the difference in attributes compared to our least preferred attribute of 22 miles per gallon, and hence the advantage of 18 miles per gallon more. Following the same approach, the alternative with Honda Accord has an attribute of 30 miles per gallon, and hence an advantage of 8 miles per gallon more compared to the least preferred attribute. Finally, select the most important advantage for this factor. If there are two that are the same, select only one. This part might be subjective, but you can invite your colleagues to collaborate on the decision in order to come to an agreement. You can invite collaborators using Add Collaborator in the action box. In our example, the advantage of Toyota is that it drives 18 miles per gallon more compared to Mercedes, while the advantage of Honda is that it drives 8 miles per gallon more compared to Mercedes. Since we have stated that the more fuel efficient the better for the environment, and the difference matters for us, it's reasonable that the most important advantage for the fuel economy factor is 18 miles per gallon more, and we select that as the most important advantage. After completing the three parts for the first factor, continue on to the next factor by clicking on Decide the advantage for the following factor, or by clicking on each factor tab in the top menu. Remember to complete all the steps. Please proceed to step number 6 to decide the importance of advantages after completing this step. The sixth step in the decision-making process is to decide the importance of advantages. Thus far in the decision-making process, you have entered mostly objective information about the alternatives, factors, and attributes. Now you will encounter the more subjective aspect of decision-making, and it could be a good idea to invite the different stakeholders to collaborate with you on that. In the previous steps, you have first determined the advantages for each alternative, and then selected the most important advantage in each factor. In this step, you will first select the Paramount advantage, which is the most important among the most important advantages. Let's continue with the same example to make it more clear. In this list, you see the most important advantage for each factor that we have selected in the previous step. Of all the advantages listed here, which one is the most important advantage of them all? In other words, which one is the paramount advantage? Well, in this particular case, the group of decision makers decided that the advantage of more well-known brand than Toyota and Honda is the paramount advantage, or in other words, the most important advantage of all the advantages. The paramount advantage will be highlighted in green and assigned an important score of 100 in the second part. This way, we are establishing a scale of importance for the decision. Secondly, you will weigh the importance of the remaining most important advantages relative to the paramount advantage on the established scale. In the example given below, we first ask how important is 18 miles per gallon more compared to more well-known brand than Toyota and Honda. Then we ask how important is 1 more liter of space and continue following the same comparison until we have weighted all the most important advantages. You can weigh the importance of advantage on the established scale by scrolling the bar horizontally. If the most important advantage in two different factors are exactly the same, you will get a message asking you whether they should be given the same score. Please confirm if that is the case. Click Continue to move to the third part. Finally, you will decide the importance of each of the remaining advantages within each factor. If there is no advantage, the weight should be equal to 0. Notice that the weight of the remaining advantages in each factor cannot be greater than the weight of the most important advantage in this factor. You will get a warning telling you that if you try to change it. Please proceed to step number 7 to define the cost of each alternative after completing this step. The seventh step in the decision-making process is to define the cost of each alternative. The cost is the price that must be paid in order to obtain an alternative and can be broken into several categories. Notice that the cost is treated separately with a clear distinction from the remaining steps. That is because the decisions must be based on the importance of advantages and not attributes, factors, or cost. Money or cost is simply a medium of exchange and can be exchanged for something that has value. Start by defining the name of the cost category in the table's header. The category could be the initial cost, maintenance cost, taxes, insurance, etc. Enter the cost for each alternative by clicking on the field next to it. Press Enter or click outside the field to exit. You can add a cost category by clicking on the plus sign in the table's header. You can delete a cost category by first clicking inside the text field for the category that you want to delete, and then click on the Remove sign. The total cost for each alternative, which is the sum of all categories, is shown under Total to the right in the table. Please proceed to step number 8 to make your final decision after completing this step. The 8th and last step in the decision-making process is to make a decision. A decision is based on the combination of the importance of advantages and the cost. Alternatives with higher cost, but lower importance of advantages, are inferior alternatives and should not be considered. All alternatives are shown on the graph, with cost along the x-axis and total importance of advantages along the y-axis. Hover over alternatives in the chart to view more info. The inferior alternatives typically lie in the bottom right-hand quadrant. The most promising alternatives typically lie in the top left-hand quadrant as they have high importance of advantages and low cost. For the non-inferior alternatives, the decision maker needs to decide how much they are willing to spend in order to obtain a particular level of importance of advantages. For example, a decision maker may choose to spend X amount of dollars in order to obtain additional information of advantages, or they may choose not to spend more money to obtain the additional importance of advantages. In this example, we see that the Mercedes C-Class is an inferior alternative, as it costs more than Toyota, but has less total importance of advantages. We also see that by spending around $4,000 more, Toyota can provide almost twice as much importance of advantage compared to Honda. So in this case, Toyota is the best alternative if our budget allows that. You can filter the alternatives inside the chart by scrolling the Cost and Importance of Advantage filter. You can also hide alternatives from the chart by scrolling to No on the summary table. Once you and your collaborators have made a decision, select the preferred alternative from the list and add some additional notes to explain the rationale of your decision. Click on Save once you're done. Once you save the decision, a pop-up will appear, asking what you want to do next. Click on View Report to view a report that summarizes your decision. You can choose between a full report or a condensed report in an A3 format. The report can be used to communicate the decisions with other stakeholders who may or may not have been part of the decision-making process. For the participants of the decision, the report can be revisited in the future for continuous learning and improvement. The report is generated automatically from the information from the decision-making process and is organized in an easy-to-follow manner.